Hey, welcome to Around the Fire, a space for conversations to nurture hearts and build lives following Jesus, thinking more deeply about big ideas and how to apply them. Welcome to our Q&R episode, the first one of 2025.
It's very exciting. Yeah. That is Sarah. I am Jonny. If this is the first... I don't know where I'm supposed to look in. Sorry, producer Andy. I'll look down here now. If this is the first time you're watching us, you will have just witnessed we are learning how to do this on video. So if you found us on YouTube, thank you. Can you subscribe? Can you drop us a like? Can you share it? Can you add a comment? We are legit building a bit of community, and we're aware that the listening community are not the same thing as the watching community. So we're trying to kind of straddle that gap and speak to both worlds and be helpful to everybody in there. If you're just listening and you're like, gosh, I wish you'd stop going on about YouTube, I don't care. Be cool, all right? Like, you're a part of something now. So, like, thanks.
Also, you were like the first hearers, man. You were in on the ground.
Straight in.
Thank you to those people if you're still listening.
Been with us through the lawnmowers, through the fire alarms, through the
emergency
appliances, panic tumble dryers. You've been with us through it all. On vacation, on location, on all the things. So thank you. However, we want to do our best job at... The internet is a brilliant and a beautiful place, but it also can be a lonely and an isolating place. And we want you to feel that you're a part of the community. We want you to feel that you are gathered around the fire. The inception of this podcast, the world does not need another podcast. Sarah and I and Andy do not need another thing to do. The reason we subject ourselves to these things is we want you to picture yourself at the good point of the conversation. You're with people that you like hanging out with. The conversation is flowing. You're at a point where you are open and receptive to sharing a bit of life and what is forming and shaping your decision to follow Jesus and help other people and live a life of faithful devotion to the ways of Jesus. And we need each other to help each other do that. So how do you do that? Podcast at elimlifechurch.co.uk is the cover all for now for how you can get in touch with, like, hey, we would like a bit more of this or a bit more of that. And out of that come Q&R episodes or guests or, other things that we like to do. So if you have seen something and you're like, hey, could you talk to us a little bit more about that? We've kind of taken a season kind of pause at the moment. We're halfway through some conversations on Micah, and to help cleanse our palate and stop us all...
Allow our brains to recombobulate.
Yeah.
Well, mine anyway.
Dipping into despair. We're just going to season a little Q&R episode in to help us with that. But if you're like, hey, talk more about some of that stuff or have some more external voices in, we can only do that if you let us know. Otherwise, we are just going to keep making executive decisions that you might not thank us for. So that is the long way around to kind of set this episode up of this is not going to track with any of the themes that we're in. This kind of is a bit of a standalone. We're at the end of a really long recording kind of session. We've diaried in some big chunks.
Feels like we have not left this room for about 13 weeks.
Yeah, what's it like outside?
Are you still existing? You still have it?
Send help. And so instead of doing a bad job of a good conversation, we want to have a good conversation around just a bit of a free-flowing, bit of stream of consciousness, a bit of some of what we've got going on in community, a bit of what's informing our thinking, what's going on, just to kind of help with that palate reset. So hopefully we've set that up, and hopefully we've set up your expectations accordingly so that you can get into that. We've got some questions that we might get to.
We've had some questions come in from community, and then we've got a couple of things that we are doing together in community we thought it would be really good to have a conversation around. Just how we're finding it, how we've ended up doing some of the things that we're doing, and how that informs how we're following Jesus, really. So I'm just going to go with this may feel a little bit out of the blue one, but it's come from someone in our community. We were talking a little bit about Easter. I have lost all concept of when this actual episode might come out. It might be before Easter, during Easter, after Easter. I don't know.
We fell out about planning these.
I know.
Even before we even knew what we were talking about. We can't seem to get this run of episodes clear in anybody's minds. So they might not even come out by this
and
point.
you'll just be like, no, they're so rubbish. I'm not putting them. But someone in community has said to us, if you could go to any part of the Easter story, so that Easter narrative, to be there, which part and why? Over to you first, friend.
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
So thinking about this, there's obviously all the right answers that you're supposed to say. All of those things.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? Would you want to be at the Last Supper? Would you want to be with the women at the tomb? Would you want to be in the upper room? Would you want to be around as Thomas kind of has his moment? Would you want to be... there's some morbid curiosity around, like, after Peter's denial, like, what's he doing?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
And out in a courtyard, weeping bitterly. Where does he go then?
What happens next? Do you want to go to that breakfast barbecue? Do you want all of that fun stuff?
Yeah.
I think as I have thought about it, some of what is intriguing, and there's kind of two parts to this. So I'm looking at Matthew 27, verse 45. At noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock.
Okay.
3 hours of darkness.
So we're in like the crucifixion moment.
Yeah. Like, what does that look like? Like, what? Not necessarily at the foot of the cross in that moment, although that is of intrigue too. We know what happens at about 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
When Jesus cries out. But in those 3 hours, where Jesus we're led to kind of presume here is dead in his physical body. But then on the face of the earth, like I was out for a walk the other day, and we are at a point in the calendar where it's starting to get light a little bit longer, and the birds are confused. Like,
do I tweet? Do I not tweet? Right. What's going on?
But what do you do when that's the middle of the day?
Yeah.
Like, what do you? So that's I think where I would be interested.
Because you'd be interested to see like what that looked like,
What's
how
the
people
creation
reacted
doing?
to it. Yeah.
What's the creation doing?
Of course, you think that. Of course, that's your thought.
What are people doing? Imagine you're just rocking on with your day, and I know we are really zoomed in the narrative in this moment, but like, what's happening in Brazil in that moment? What's happening in? Do you know what I mean? Like, they're across the face of the earth. What's going on in that moment? Like, what happens? I just think that would be fascinating.
That's cool. I like that. Okay. Yes, taking your point that like you've just disparaged all the places I thought I might have wanted to go.
Yep.
That's fine.
You asked me to
on.
go first.
No, I know. I think I would actually like to be, maybe because God's been speaking to me out of this particular story and account a lot over the last few years. In Luke 24, the disciples on the road to Emmaus. So Jesus died. They've all scattered. They don't quite know what's happening. Some of them have stayed in Jerusalem. Some of them haven't. And there's this story of, up until this point in the story, the name Cleopas hasn't been told to us particularly. We don't know who this is. Cleopas and companion, could be wife, could be sister. They are walking away from Jerusalem, and the text tells us that like they're disappointed. They're carrying disappointment with them. They don't understand why Jesus has died, how this has happened. This is not what they thought was going to happen. And so rather than staying in Jerusalem, they start to head to home, the road to Emmaus, that's where their home is. And so they start to walk away from Jerusalem, from where they'd been, from this center that was supposed to represent all their hopes and dreams in Jesus. And they carry disappointment with them. And as they walk on the road, Jesus comes alongside them walking on the road. So first of all, like just
What's
the
that?
ordinary, like, and these are unnamed disciples. So it's not like one of the 12. It's not like one of the women that we know were at the tomb. It's none of those. It's people that perhaps up until this point have not been involved in the story or introduced to us. Maybe they've been around, but we don't know them. And so I think that's really interesting that these two people get this. It would seem like a fairly long conversation with Jesus. If we're looking time and how long it would take to walk from Jerusalem to Emmaus, like there's a few hours in that conversation. But they are, the text also says that they kept from recognizing that it's Jesus.
Yep.
I would love to have been there to see what that was like. So they're going like, we had hoped, there's this little phrase that we had hoped that Jesus, essentially we'd hoped that Jesus was the one going to kick out, the ruling authorities and set up a kingdom. And like now we're carrying this disappointment. And Jesus patiently takes them right back to scripture from the start and tells them the story. Can you imagine the resurrected Jesus literally walking well with you? See what I did there? Nice. Walking well with you along that path, along that journey, explaining who he is, why he came, why he died, how it fulfilled all those scriptures, having that whole conversation, getting to home, and being, do you want to come in for some food? Hospitality, you're in that culture. And then as Jesus breaks the bread and as they drink of the cup, which would have been a new practice to link to Jesus, because remember, they only just had the Last Supper, 48 hours before. And so in that moment, which hasn't yet become, go back and listen to our episode on the Last Supper, but like hasn't yet become this really significant, like historical weighted meal, the bread and wine, is immediately recognizable now as Jesus.
Yeah.
And so all the layers of that, and then he just disappears. It's like, I'm like, how did that happen? Like, did they turn around and they look back and he was gone? Was there like a puff of smoke? Like, you know, how did that happen? Like, what would that have been like? And then they decide to go back to Jerusalem. So they take that news of resurrection life. They take their wisdom of like, oh, we understand so much more now. And they take it back. And when they get back to Jerusalem, they realize that like other people have seen Jesus and all the disciples, the team, the apprentices are all a buzz of like, what does this mean? But I just think that would have been, I would love to, knowing what I know, I'd love to like accompany them on that conversation and see what Jesus looks like and see what that moment of like recognition is and all of that. Because there are things about that story that we don't know. We presume we like hazard a guess as to why they didn't understand until that point. And, you know, there are layers, but and to see the resurrected Christ walking with people who up until now have not really had a part to play in the story. But he takes that time with them and he explains and he's patient and
Great.
And their disappointment turns to hope. You know, death turns to life.
Great.
In the process of a walk and a talk with Jesus.
So good.
I love a walk and a talk with Jesus.
Isn't it?
So that's what I like.
Nice.
Yeah.
Good.
That's it. I'm done.
Fun. Fun. Okay, what else
Tell
we got?
us, if you're genuinely, if like you're listening or watching and you can in any way comment on any of those things, like let us know, like where would you find yourself? Where would you want to be for that part of the Easter story? Maybe you'd be like, oh, do you know what? I'd love to be in Pilate's kind of palaces, finding out what's going on. You know, he's like washing his hands or you know, there's so many parts of that story. Or, I wonder what happens for the prisoner who's let free instead of Jesus. Like, whoa, what's going on for Barabbas? Like, that would be an interesting thing. But yeah, let us know if there are comments. If not, podcast@elimlifechurch.co.uk.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
Cool. What's next?
I would like to talk, if that's all right.
Sure.
So our whole theme for 2025 is walking well. And one of the things that we felt to do as a whole community is to walk well through the book of Psalms together. 150 Psalms in 1 year. And the way that we've done that is our brilliant team have like worked out a way for us to break that down so that every week in our Sunday gathered space, when we meet together, someone from community, a voice in our community reads one of the Psalms, which has been so beautiful. First of all, like the public reading of God's word is amazing. To hear all different voices, different generations and backgrounds and ethnicities and, you know, just such a variety of people bringing their voice and hearing scripture in different voices and accents and generations. I love it. I love it. And then we are being encouraged as a community that through that week then, we read through 3 Psalms. They're not in chronological order. They are in thematic order. So whatever the theme of our Sunday communication has been, or whatever the theme of that psalm from that week has been, Assistant Pastor Sarah Hingley has helped us to go, these are 3 psalms that might speak to some of those themes similarly.
Yep.
And the invitation to read that on your own or with others or in spaces where we meet, eat and pray together.
Yep.
And so in the space that I'm a part of, we have a pizza and prayer space, which is great. We get to make pizza together and eat pizza together and pray together. We've been going through psalms together as well.
Fun.
And so we've used these to read them together again, and maybe just to share what we feel God's been saying through them, and then maybe even to help us find language to pray. I find the Psalms so helpful as a language for prayer.
Okay.
Because sometimes you don't know what to say. I sometimes get to go on the road and talk to people about prayer things. And I was having a conversation with someone at a community, not our community, recently. And they were like, praying out loud feels like a big thing. Like, how do I do that?
Yeah.
And so one of my encouragements, often with people who perhaps find themselves either that they're at a point in their life where it's very difficult or hard to find the words, you can read and pray a psalm, make it your own.
Right.
Or perhaps lacking a bit of confidence to hear your voice out loud in front of other people. It is a bit of a weird thing, right? Like, where else do you do that?
It is weird.
To like all stand around and talk to God, but together and out loud one after another. It's a bit weird.
Well, everyone's definitely listening.
Yeah. And so we feel that. And as much as we're like, it doesn't matter if you all speak at the same time, like, it doesn't matter if it feels like you're tripping over your words, like, God really cares about hearing from you and your voice, and we love as a community to do that. I find Psalms can be so helpful, partly because they are just full of the whole range of human emotion and existence. I think partly because they permission you to, like, some of the public Psalms we've read, I felt really uncomfortable with.
Okay, why?
Because the language that is used and the kinds of prayers that they're praying are like, rain down on the enemy. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can ask God to do that. Like, what does that mean? And so I think we can become edited and polite in our prayers with God, in our conversation with God, even in our own, like, when no one else is listening other than God, but I think particularly when we're with others. And so then to take some language, to borrow this language that has been written and curated for us to help us connect with God, songs and praise and prayers, I've found so helpful and a little bit confronting.
Nice. So let's lean into that a little bit. The privilege and the spaces of we affectionately refer to it as your other job. So as you're traveling and encountering, partly because we're going to go on to talk about things that belong to kind of our community specifically. But then as you are out and about and helping other people connect with the word of God and the ways of God, what are you, without specifics perhaps, but like, what do you see as repeating patterns that people are really getting, and they're like, yep, that makes complete sense to me, like the days and age that we live in, I can see a path to Jesus in that and how that is helping? And then what are the things that are changing, or what are the things that are, that maybe used to be a free swing that now are proving a little bit more complicated or complex, or people just have no way in or frame of reference for, like, what does it look like? Because it's easy, I think we can understandably form our perceptions of the church, capital C, from the limits of our own experience. But we belong to each other, and there's a lot going on. So what, in your kind of experience, are you seeing, hearing, encountering?
With the caveat that I'm not an expert on church.
Why?
But that I guess I'm getting to experience lots of different church communities. I think what I've noticed is loads of things. So let me try and be as succinct as I can. I am noticing different graces on different communities. And what I mean by that is, in some communities, there might be a grace for working with a particular group of people. So, for example, it might be that they've got a real heart for working, say, with refugees or with unhoused people, or there might be like a particular grace on their life of that as a community, and it then forms who they are together as a whole. Or it might be that there is a real grace on praise. So some communities that I go to, like, honestly, there's like half a guitar string goes and the whole place is ready to praise Jesus, and they're in it and they're going for it, and that isn't the case everywhere. And that seems to be, I wonder what God's doing with that. Is that just a particular time that community is going through, or is that a grace that's on them? In conversations, for some of them, it would be like, oh no, this is something they've really been seeking God for, now they're seeing that. I think what I'm having conversations with lots of leaders of churches who are going, we're seeing God move in ways, and we would sort of say similar for here, like, we're seeing God move in ways that we don't feel like we're responsible for, which is brilliant, because I don't think we're ever meant to be responsible for them in the way that perhaps we've twisted ourselves into, but like, somehow God is connecting people and bringing people, and we can't, like, there's not a line from we did this thing and then this person connected, or this family, or this thing. It seems to be these, what I would call divine connections, divine appointments, where God is bringing people together outside of gathered spaces, and people are open to spiritual conversations and open to Jesus. And so communities are growing, but perhaps not in the ways that we've expected them to grow before. Like, if we do this event, or if we do this thing, then we will find a way to connect people. It seems that the Spirit of God is doing what the Spirit of God does and is at work. And I think what we, the church, are starting to go is, oh, I recognize that God is at work in my colleague, and I recognize that God is at work in my neighborhood, and I recognize that God is at work in my, like, in the team that I'm part of for my hobby. And I am a Jesus follower there as much as I am when I'm gathered with other community who follow Jesus.
Yeah.
And so those conversations are happening, whether they're at the gym or that, you know.
Yeah.
So I think some of those things are happening, which I think is really interesting and exciting. And then I think when it comes to prayer, I'm really pleased to see that this, which is my whole like life, is I feel like I have been someone often to just be really provocative in the sense of like, but what about prayer?
Okay.
Like, what about prayer? So you'll be in an environment or anything, and I have often felt, up until the last maybe 18 months, I've often felt like I'm the person in the room going, shall we pray about that? Or what about prayer? Or what do we think God's saying in response to that? So whereas what I think I'm seeing is a bit of a shift away from that to, no, prayer is being woven into the fabric of everything. And so now the question isn't like, what about prayer? Now the question is like, oh, how can we grow in prayer? How can we sustain, our life of prayer with God? How can we expand it to not just be about like, how is God speaking to our community about maybe a kids' church thing or a youth thing, but in my work environment? And so what I'm seeing is some of those things are happening, and it feels a lot more like organic and supernaturally organic, which I think is amazing.
I think that's a good thing. Why? Two things. Why do you think that's happening, and why is that important?
So, why do I think it's happening? I think it's happening because I think we've perhaps, how do I say this? I think sometimes when it comes to prayer, we've like commodified it or commercialized it. And what I mean by that is we've either given it over to the professional prayers. So we've gone, you have it, perhaps we would use the language of, you feel like you've got a calling for intercession. And what I mean by that is some people feel very burdened in a holy and godly way to give lots of their time and attention to praying on behalf of others for certain things, for specific things. Sometimes they will spend their whole lives maybe praying for an element of justice or for a particular family member or something like that. And so I think when we haven't identified with praying in that way, we've gone, oh, I don't pray then. So either then we delegate it to somebody else, or we look at them and go, oh, I can't pray like that, therefore I can't pray. And what I think the Spirit is doing is trying to teach us and show us that prayer is this pathway of connection between us and God, and it's much more about relationship than it is about outcome. Although I still think we should ask really big and bold, but the outcome becomes, and this is part of my journey as well, maybe it's always been happening, but I'm just noticing it in a different way now because of my kind of journey with God and prayer is, I think I am, and I think people are praying bolder prayers, but not feeling as disheartened if the answer isn't in the way that they expected. They go, oh, well, I trust you with the outcome, God. And so those are lots of conversations I'm having with people around like, it doesn't feel like God's answering my prayer. And then you get into a conversation with someone, which is one of my favorite things to do, is chat to people after the meetings.
That's new, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk to us about that.
Because often you're like the guest speaker, so I roll you out, you do your number. And also like I'm talking about stuff I'm really passionate about, really excited, and I've spent enough time to kind of craft like a fairly decent
conversation.
Talk. But what I'm really enjoying is people coming up to me after those meetings. I have like a little kind of setup that really I'm just to give away resources. But a lot of people are starting to have those conversations of like, oh, I've had this experience and this has been really painful and difficult, and this is where I'm at with prayer. Can I talk to you about this? And I'm really enjoying some of those conversations.
Great.
And a lot of them are, it doesn't feel like God's answering my prayer in the way that I'm wanting or expecting. What do I do with that? And instead of, oh, well, I'm never going to pray again, they're wanting to go, help me understand that. Like, talk to me about what that means. I'm like, I don't have all the answers, but here's some of my experience, or here's a perspective on that. Or perhaps even to just ask a question back, like, what are you expecting God to do? How are you expecting God to answer? Could it be that actually God has answered it and you just haven't realized that God's answered? Like, how are you keeping a track of the things that you're asking for and how God's responding? And so helping to kind of broaden that idea to conversation rather than transaction, to relationship rather than transaction, and consuming. I also think I'm seeing like people, and I feel like this is, maybe again, it's just because I'm seeing it now. It's like you buy a red car, you see a red car, you know? But that it isn't just about kind of gathering with others in a prayer meeting context.
Okay.
It's about living from a life of prayer. And I
Okay.
feel like that's been a huge part of what I've wanted to encourage and equip people in and challenge people to. And I think I'm starting to see that. Maybe I'm just
Okay.
noticing it. Maybe it's always been there, and I'm just noticing it now. But I find that so encouraging, that there's not like this false pressure that somehow our prayers have got to do everything.
Right.
It's actually, prayer turns me towards Jesus. Prayer helps me to connect with Jesus. And I can do that with my breath, or I can do that in an all-night prayer meeting where I pray in tongues for 5 hours. And both of those are
Count.
equally
Yeah.
legitimate and valued. And each of those are heard and responded to by a loving Heavenly Father. So that's
Cool.
a very long, rambly answer for that,
Great.
isn't it?
It's the point of this episode. Cool. Fun.
Yeah, so I think that's some of the stuff, and that's why I'm really pleased that we're in Psalms. And we found ourselves like, as a team, we obviously we pray regularly, but like we found ourselves at various points this year going, oh, God's speaking through this psalm, and a few of us have gone, oh yeah, me too, same thing, and so that's really exciting as well.
Yeah, it's something that you and I had a conversation about. I can't remember specifically how long ago, but we felt would be really important for 2025 for us as a community to be in the Psalms. So then we were trying to work out, well, how do we do that? Because our Sunday communications are planned and we trust the Spirit in those too. So then this wasn't an instead of, it felt like an as well as.
Yeah.
So then we wanted to, we had this idea of walking well, and we were sort of building out this idea of walking well and what does that look like? And then sort of floated this idea of, I think we should be bringing this compendium of our human experience together. Where could we find that? And then we were like, oh.
Yeah. And we want to do something creative with this as well.
Yeah.
We've got people who
We're
are
building resource with
thinking
it.
about it and wanting to do something so that it becomes reflective of us as a community as well, isn't it?
Yeah, there's something in our response, there's something in the immediacy of this year, and then there's something in terms of our future commitment to this project that we haven't really talked publicly about. So if you listen to the podcast, this is kind of the inside scoop of that. But we really feel there's something in our interaction with these words, with these songs, with these poems, with these reflections, with these moments, with these, like this artistically curated expression of humanity's walking well and not so well with the Creator, that should be like part of our, and I'm going to say daily, but what I mean by that is like just our
Regular.
consciousness.
Yeah.
Like not as part of what formats our routine, but part of what inclines us towards Jesus.
Yeah, that's why it's not like on Monday we're reading this on, but like here's 3 you could read at any point. You could read
As
them all
you
in
need.
one go. You could
Yeah.
read them on the road. You could listen to them.
can do
You know,
multiples,
we
you
haven't
can-
put like a reading plan together in the sense of here's a plan we're all following, but just like here's 3 you might want to read this week.
And we are constantly trying to play with what does community formation look like in contemporary culture. So then what does it mean? What does it look like for a community of our size and shape to be doing the same thing across a period of time without necessarily being like, on this day at this time, we're all going to behave in the same way in the same place.
It's a bit like the prayer conversation, isn't it? Like that out in the wild, just growing in it, learning, walking with God. Yeah.
Yeah. So what does it look like to know that we're doing that together, knowing that some will have maybe very familiar iterations of that, others will have very abstract interactions with that, others are like some of us catching up to what has been part of people in our community's devotional rhythm for a really long time, and others are reading these words for the very first time.
Isn't that beautiful?
Like incredible. And for all of that to be happening without us trying to pull that into something that's convenient to us, or pull that into a shape to resolve in a,
Neat bow.
yeah, like we're not trying to pull it into something that at the end of the year we go tick, like we've done Psalms now, so we'll go and do Proverbs next year. But like what, from a formational point of view,
How are we encountering Jesus?
how are we encountering Jesus, which is something that you and I think deeply about and think often about. And it like formation as a word, as an idea, is having a moment, which is fine, and that's okay. But we all mean slightly different things by that, and we're messing with this idea of what are the things that we do repeatedly, twinned with our awareness of God. How is that changing us? And so we are working on things that I'm not giving away on the podcast right now, to help do that better. For us individually, for us as a staff team, for us as a community of believers, for then how we serve the city that we get to be part of, the movement that we're part of, the creation that we exist within.
So home, near and far.
Right. Copyright, trademark, whichever camera I need to look into.
It's ours.
Yeah. But so then the abstraction of Scripture, we don't have particularly healthy habits within our tribe of a long wrestle with Scripture. We quite like a copy and paste.
Yeah, we like a race through it in a year.
We like to achieve it.
Yeah.
We like to conquer it. We like to achieve it, and we like to apply it as a sticking plaster for mystery. And it can be a version of those things. And we've talked at length in different places about perhaps why we don't want to encourage that. But then also what's important to us in our decisions for community, in our oversight of community. We don't ever want to make a point from a place of negative comparison. And so we're confident that we'll probably spend the rest of our lives helping people unlearn things. So
myself, most
right,
importantly.
we lead the line in that. So then how do we help people unlearn? Well, you don't help people unlearn from a place that's tight and defensive and aggressive. And so then instead of trying to make a point through negative comparison to say, well, that's a bit of a hacky way to do that, that's not really helpful, well, that's not the best way to do that, is that, well, if that's what's got you this far, that's between you and Jesus. And it's not really any of my business to fetch for that. However, from this point on,
how about we try this?
How about we look at adding another club to the bag rather than trying to take things away from people? Actually, we believe the character and the nature of God is to invite you into an abundant life that is immeasurably more. So rather than having things taken away from us, perhaps what we're given is an invitation to more. And then as I become more familiar with what Jesus is like, the things that I'm reaching for start to look different. And so instead of feeling like I'm at a loss by choosing Jesus, I see that, oh no, I'm having things added to my life through choosing Jesus. That there is more hope, there is more life, there is more grace, there is more peace, there is more tolerance, there is more resilience, there is more appetite and awareness to walk well with Jesus and with others through some of these things, instead of reaching for you can't, you won't, you shan't, you don't, you won't.
It's a different way around, isn't it?
Yeah, totally.
And I think in 2024 we had this idea of soul path and this idea of the backpack. That actually it wasn't that. I sense that there's more. Is that it's already in there. Like, it's because of Jesus.
It's been given. It's
already been given to us, and then we just spend our whole lifetime unpacking that and going, "Oh, wow, God, that's amazing."
Look what else He's given me.
Look what else He's given me. And then also going, "Oh, maybe that thing was good for a moment, and now I can let that go, and I don't need to carry that in my backpack anymore." And so to then pick up this theme of walking well is our attempt to go, okay, so what does some of that look like in the reality of life? How are we doing that? Because practices and pathways are brilliant, but they are a means. They are not the end in themselves. That what we're wanting to do is encounter Jesus and walk with Jesus and be shaped by Jesus to become more like Jesus in the whole of life. And I know we're going to kind of wrap up in a few minutes' time, but before we do, I just wanted to have a quick conversation about something that we are trying this year for the first time as a community. In that vein of what would it look like to just give ourselves a little thought each week as we head towards Easter? So in some contexts and cultures, the 6 weeks from Pancake Day, it is 6 weeks, isn't it? Leading up to Easter is really formalized and stylized, and and we haven't done that, but what we have done is in these weeks leading up to Easter, we've created we hope a conversation and pathways to encountering Jesus and walking well with God and others, and we've called it the Bramino Way. Do you want to talk a little bit about that is, and then we'll just quickly maybe look at those 6 waypoints that we've picked up for it.
So we want to so part of walking well and then part of the Bramino is we want to help people understand that a life with Jesus is not static or stayed. And I think a lot of longer form conversation that you and I have the privilege of having with leaders and other people and other things, in that in our experience, often people have been given a relationship with the church and maybe less a relationship with Jesus. Again, not coming from a place of negative comparison.
Or have only known how to have their relationship with Jesus
through a relationship with the church.
Yeah.
So, which you can extrapolate your own opinions and comments on that, but we feel instead of bemoaning that, we can do something about that. And so part of the big idea of the titles that we choose and the resource that we create is communicating this language of movement, communicating this language of, it's process.
On the go with.
It's like, it's all the time, it's happening. It's not just these static, repeatable moments. And that...
Like a Sunday at 10:30.
Like a Sunday at 10:30. In that I have a parallel awareness that feeds into this. I think so much of our adult disappointment is when our relationships change, but our relationships are formed around function instead of like any sort of legitimate relationship. And so...
your colleague moves away, your friend moves away, or they go to a different stage of life, and
you
then
don't
that
track
becomes,
anymore. And so then what was your tight-knit community now breaks up, and you feel isolated or alone or disappointed or let down or whatever. And we're projecting some of perhaps what we could be finding in a different way of perceiving life, of like, we're constantly in motion, we're constantly moving, we're constantly... And I would argue that there is a temptation for us to feel that we have possession of our life by getting everything set and still, and which I don't think is helpful or serving us. And I think the invitation that we see from the Spirit is follow me, come with me, come with me. I'm inviting you in, I'm inviting you in, I'm inviting you in, which is really difficult to do if you set up all of your existence around static points of whatever.
Or that there's, I think we talked about this in the episode with Kate, or that there's a picture of what it looks like to be a disciple or apprentice to Jesus, and that I've somehow got to arrive at that point. And so your whole life and energy is trying to arrive at that point. And maybe what that point is looks like, I don't know, like leading something in community, or having read through the whole Bible, or being able to use this gift or grace, or, you know, it is often linked to those things. And then you get there and you realize, well, that doesn't do the thing either. And actually the invitation is the journey, the process, the pilgrimage, isn't it?
So culturally, where we are currently becoming the beneficiaries of the gamification of process, like it turns out you can't apply that to discipleship. You can't apply the gamification of following Jesus.
What do you mean by that?
So that you can't build a life following Jesus through incremental rewards by performing properly.
Okay.
And so
it's not progress, it's process. Yeah.
So I'm thinking of how we are setting everything else up in our lives through gamification. And I understand that. Like you want to learn a new language, you want a new workout.
On the Duolingo,
you want a new workout routine, you want to develop a skill, you want career progression, you ask ChatGPT, write for me a program of how I can master this skill, go to this place, whatever. Fine, I have no tension with those things, but it would appear that discipleship sits outside of process. It sits outside of the gamification of process, and it's an invitation to a person. It's not the acquisition of skills or things. It's knowing the face and voice of God. And so we are trying to do that for and with people really busy lives who do not have the time and space to carve out these big sweeping moments of you and I laying the groundwork of like maybe through the cultural milieu of what we are in and going through and why maybe we do this and not that, or maybe perhaps it used to look like this and that's okay and we want to talk everybody into a place of peace around that, but it's not like that going forward, or we're going to change this or move that, or can we... And it's not about looking for permission, it's about understanding that our responsibility is to equip the saints for the work they're being invited into. And so to do that, we can't keep setting up these big top moments to go, right, this is what we need you to think. This is what we need you to do. This is where we need you to be. This is what we need you to get behind. And so instead of that, so discipleship, in my opinion...
that's been one of the questions that came in of like, what does discipleship look like in contemporary culture?
Yeah, it looks like freedom as a value, and then from an administrative point of view, baking in ownership and responsibility.
I think that's something you have helped us as a staff and leadership team to think about in more like broader and deeper ways, of this idea of what would it look like to for each person to know what it looks like for them to follow Jesus, and that we help to resource or inspire or equip or point in the right direction or create opportunities to connect with others who can help you do that, but without it feeling like it's all got to come through an organized program or a central person other than Jesus, that together we can disciple one another and walk well with one another. This whole idea of like loving God with all our heart, soul, mind and strength, that's kind of I'm going to do it again, undergirding like our thinking. I know, our thinking this year, like how it's part of the walking well, the Bramino is that. It's not like the front line of that, but underneath it, that's kind of some of our heart and prayer and desire.
It's saturated in that. And so then freedom is not abandonment. So then it's our responsibility as overseers to resource well, so that when we legitimately say, what is the Spirit inviting you into, we believe and we take the text seriously when it says, my paraphrase, overseers are responsible for resourcing you for the thing that God's inviting you into. And so then how do we do that? So then what does that look like? Hey, here's a bunch of Psalms, and I'm not going to tell you how to read it. I'm not going to tell you what day to read it. I'm going to tell you what version to read it. I'm not going to tell you how you read it or with whom or whatever. But so then you're given the freedom to take ownership and responsibility for you on a wet Wednesday to go, I want to find and follow Jesus. And so then if you are in community, you belong to community, and you are given the privilege of oversight of others, it's less about conforming their behavior to serve your purposes than it is to equip them to say yes to Jesus.
Yeah, it's not like a psalm class every week.
No. So then out of that comes our intention as we walk well towards Easter. I use the language of, in Christian community, I think we're a conversionist religion. What does that mean? It means that we feel compelled to tell people about Jesus. It means that we're not a closed shop. We're not like, that's it. That this is everybody that's in, and the rest of you, sorry, unlucky. Like, we believe that the good news is to be shared. And so there are people who don't know Jesus yet. And so then in health and with life, we want to point people to an encounter with the living God. So what helps us do that, we have points in the calendar where we have probably 2 free swings, is my language. We have 2 culturally open moments at Easter and at Christmas, where it's less work to say, hey, do you want to think about Jesus? And people go, yeah, okay. And so then my diatribe is like, so if we're not trying to lead the conversation with come to church, but we're trying to lead the conversation with experience Jesus, how do we do that? Well, we do that by being primed really, really well for a positive conversation at a point when people are open about having these conversations.
What are you doing for Lent?
So we are, it's a long way around. It's our responsibility as overseers to resource people to have that conversation. So Birmingham is where we are, and affectionately, locally, Birmingham is referred to as Brum.
Yes, neither of us have Brum accents, because we are residents here now. We love this city, but we are not originally from this city.
We are resident aliens, and so with affection, we get to use the local language, which is Brum. And then Amino is a truncation of Camino or Camino, which is a pilgrimage journey, which is really, really old. And there's a few versions of it, generally taking you through France and Spain, and in our iteration, taking you to the coast in northern Spain at the end. And it's this medieval
medieval
pilgrimage journey, which you and I are big fans of pilgrimage. You and I are big fans
just as the idea of it,
journey,
walking well, the process, all of that. Often the community, I've got some friends, it is on my list to do. I have some friends who've done it a number of times, but just the conversations you have when you're walking, the awareness you grow in of who Jesus is and what you're called to, literally physically carrying a backpack and realizing I've packed way too much stuff that I need.
Now what?
And so you're like literally divesting of the backpack as you're going along because you can't physically carry it, the weight of it. So many layers of that.
And so we want to bring a redemptive element to pilgrimage, but it's ancient, and instead of having to stress people out about that, we've created
also who's got like 6 weeks to go walk a Camino.
So but what we loved about the Camino is it's sacrificial, like it's expensive, literally in time, in money, in like you have to break your usual rhythm to think about your steps. It's shared. There's new rhythm and routine. It's outdoors. It's subject to like you're putting yourself in a very deliberate position of cost and expense. And it's, and the original motive for doing that is probably not one that we would track with now, but we wanted to bring some of the redemptive elements to those things that are good.
Yeah.
It is good to put yourself in a place of dependence that costs you something, to say, God, if you don't show up here, I don't have what I need. And
these 6 weeks are often encouraged to be like a bit of a stretch outside of your comfort.
It's meant to be difficult. It's meant to be difficult. And so then you might culturally know people. You might be yourself. We're okay with it. But it's not in the Bible, which is why in our tradition we have usually steered away from it. And so you and I, this is a gentle reintroduction to some ways.
This is a practice that could be helpful.
Yeah, and it's served other people who love Jesus and people well. And so we don't want to lose the baby and the bathwater. And so we want to bring that redemptive element to like, there's something about thinking about journey. There's something about thinking about cost. There's something worth thinking about dependence. There's something worth thinking about community. There's something worth thinking about traveling with strangers. There's something worth thinking about eating together.
There's something about we're thinking about the city that we're in.
Yes.
That we're called to serve. And
outside
that we,
of ourselves.
Yeah, that we exist in. And that as a church community, we would be in lots of different places geographically and in every situation across the city. Yeah.
And so we've kind of smashed those two ideas together. And what I love in like my creative practice is like, I always want to know what happens in that space between. What happens if we take these two things that we think we know a version of, and there's a few other elements in here too, right? So like if we collide all of those things together, what happens?
Yeah.
Like what goes on in that in-between space, like what goes on there. I think what goes on there is our discipleship and our devotion and our community formation and I think that's what happens in those spaces. So we have created this resource to help our community walk well towards Easter with a hope that it will prime people's intention to have healthy conversations about Jesus. We like to play in community with what we do around Easter. Again, I can't remember when this comes out. Let's not fall out about it. So that either has happened or is about to happen.
So either happy Easter or hope you had a happy Easter.
Yeah, right. Let us know how did we do with Easter. But it's about priming community in the rhythm of the culture that we live in, to being open to community. So to stop thinking about ourselves for 20 minutes, to being open to serving another, to being aware of the city that we live in. And instead of then that being a negative or a version that other people are telling us, or like what's redemptive in this city? Where is God moving in this city? Where is there hope?
It's like eyes up to look for what the Spirit is doing and how to join in, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
And so then we are not the bastions of hope. We belong to a body. So there are things that we do really, really well in our community, and there are other things that we're still learning how to do really, really well in community. So where do we benefit from where other people have gone before us and figured out like some other things? We don't believe in isolationism. We don't believe in cutting ourselves off or annexing ourselves. Which again is an unspoken thing that you and I are trying to do with this resource. We're in the north of the city. We've talked about this before. We have the data. We know the statistics.
Traditionally known north parts of cities
suffer.
Are not traditionally known to be places that flourish.
And we don't believe
historically.
And we don't believe that has to be the truth. We think we're being invited into doing something.
We follow a God of creation and recreation, don't we? And he is renewing and redeeming all things, and we get to join in, and that's part of, I guess, that the Bramina way is a participatory thing. Like you don't accidentally stumble upon a pilgrimage in that sense. You choose to go, I am going to set my intention. I'm going to organize my life around some of this stuff for the next 6 weeks. And so we're going to wrap up in a minute, but like we've looked at like Bible, bread, wine, table, oil, and water to help us as like little waypoints each week. We'll get Andy to put like the link to the resources. So whether we're before or after or whoever, like if you want to have a little look at some of those resources, and maybe there's the microphone. Maybe they can help you as you find and follow Jesus. We want to sort of be helpful in that. Get
around those symbols, like get around those things.
Because on the Camino way there are particular
shells to collect along the way.
There are waypoints. There are things to pass through or to stop at or to collect as you go along. So we wanted to take that idea, and we're in the book of Matthew. We will have had some episodes of Matthew 26. So a lot of where we're from on the Bramino is we're linking Psalms with Matthew 26, and we're kind of like smushing those things together and going, okay, what do you want to say to us, God, as we journey in that?
There are layers in the lasagna, as we like to say, but I would encourage people, like, get a hold of those elements. We're going to, again, give too much of the game away if it hasn't happened yet, but we want to gather around those elements as Jesus did it, so we feel okay about it. Like, these are things that are important to God, it would seem. They tell the story of God. Right. And so,
Oh my gosh, we're talking like each other now. It's time to stop this
time to wrap
podcast
it
quick.
up. And so if you're not part of our community, like this is an invitation to you as well to
Yeah.
like get around these things, like grab a Bible, make some bread, drink some wine,
Take
invite
communion
people
with
around your
people.
table,
Yeah.
like carry oil out with you. Like, what is it? There's a really fun practice we haven't got to yet with the water. I'm really excited about that. And we know like this is the first iteration of this.
Yeah, but I think that's really one of the things we often say on the podcast is like, we are not experts, but we are practitioners. We're trying to live this out in the reality of every day. And one of the things that I really love about our community actually is we can go, hey, we're going to have a go at this. This is like our first go at it. We've got like really brilliantly creative people helping us to like make it look good and make sense, and you know, people who are really excited about the process of getting this information out to people. But yeah, this is our kind of first attempt at it, and we're excited to see what God's doing in it and then what we can learn from it as well.
How we do it better.
Yeah.
Version 1 is always exploratory, isn't it? And then we refine and improve and do all that stuff. So get around those 6 elements. They're designed as one a week, but you can use them however you want to use them. They're interchangeable. There is not some divine order, like as we remember them.
It's absolutely accidental.
The grace of God, if there is. It's as we could remember them. And the devotional elements that go with it are really like easy to interact with.
Yeah.
They're supposed to help you as you're walking. They're supposed to help your movement. They're not like big bus stop moments.
Yeah, can you take 4 hours to do this?
No, they're like
Not that.
really like as you're doing the rest of life. Which we think is worth thinking about. Because we know in our part of our tribe and our tradition, there's 2 things. We're in a hurry to get to Easter Sunday all the time.
Because we want the victory, we want the overcoming, and we skip some of the process in that, don't we?
And the irony being every day is Easter Sunday. And so we get invited into that all the time. But again, the gamification of the process, we're sort of maybe looking to mark a moment or to externally be rewarded or justified or acknowledged for making a fuss around Easter, whereas I'm not entirely sure that's the fullness of what the relaunch of the story is about in that moment. So this is to, again, without taking away all of those principles that we're trying to bake in through what we do. If you listen to this podcast, you're now very glad you don't work with us. But these
bless you. Yeah.
These are some of the rigors that we put ourselves through when we are thinking about resource and thinking about why we're doing the things that we're doing.
It is, but it is thought through and prayed through and with a desire to
agonized over.
Yeah.
Because it matters. It really matters, but it shouldn't feel like a tax or a burden. It should feel light. It should feel invitational. It should feel additional. It should feel that it's pointing you to Jesus. It should feel by the time you get that in your hand that it's going to help resource you, not add a weight to what you're not doing or what you don't have or where Jesus isn't in you yet. It should always be an up and out invitation.
Yeah. Well, let me finish by praying our Bramino prayer. So we have taken it from Psalm 86, verses 11 to 13, using the new revised standard version updated edition. Come on, look at that.
Well done.
So yeah, let me kind of close out this Q&R episode. Get in touch with us, podcast at edenlifechurch.co.uk. We'd love to hear your questions and feedback, and we will definitely kind of be doing this kind of thing again. So yeah, let us know. But as we end this one, let me pray this, and you might want to get Psalm 86 out, open, Googled if you want to do that. But if not, let me just pray this for us, with us, over us. Teach me your way, O Lord, that I may walk in your truth. Give me an undivided heart to revere your name. I give thanks to you, O Lord my God, with my whole heart, and I will glorify your name forever. For great is your steadfast love toward me. You have delivered my soul from the depths of Sheol. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for being with us. You might be able to tell we're a bit wilted. This is the end of a really long recording kind of block of time
Marathon.
for us. So
I mean,
well
genuine.
done. Thank you.
Yeah,
I don't
please
know,
pray for Andy. Hopefully he'll be able to kind of lead the spaceship and
smuggle something out of this. So go and enjoy an Easter egg or a high five or whatever it is that you need to do, because you made it too. I don't know what happens next. I think we're going back to Micah.
No, we are dead. Yeah, we are going back to Micah.
We're going back to Micah. So we look forward to picking that back up. That is worth your time. So we will see you on the next one. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.